Aloha, my name's Anna Covert, and I'm coming to you live from my battleship here on the beautiful island of Oahu. This week on the Covert Code, the topic is behavioral science and marketing, and my very special guest is Nancy Harhut, award-winning author of Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, keynote speaker, and chief creative officer for HBT Marketing. Nancy is one of my personal heroes, and I'm so grateful that she's here today to share how behavioral science can increase marketing effectiveness, targeting, and how these proven strategies might evolve in an age of AI and automation. Thanks so much for being here, Nancy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a total honor. I am psyched to be here.
Well, I'm so excited. I got my book here, and I keep it right next to my desk, so because I can refer to it at will. And it's just such a thrill that you're taking the time. So I appreciate that.
You are very kind. Thank you.
To dive right in. I know not everyone, all my listeners have read your book yet, but we're going to definitely put a link into all the feeds so that they can. But can you tell us a little bit about, your background and what sparked your passion for behavioral science and how it kind of led you to your role today at HBT?
Sure, sure. So, it's funny as I was, going through college and all, I knew I wanted to write. And I thought it was either going to be the Great American Novel, and I knew it wouldn't be that. And I thought the other option was journalism. So I actually have my degree in journalism, but it turned out not to be the thing that I pursued. As I was going to my senior year, I looked around and I looked at some of my peers and they had this fire in their belly about journalism that I didn't have. And I said, you know what? I'll be good, but I'm not going to be great. I got to find something else. So I scrambled and I took all these other writing related classes that I suddenly realized were available to me. There's public relations and marketing and, corporate communications. And long story short, I found my way into marketing and I really liked it. So I started to work my way up through the agency world. And then one day a mentor gave me this book by Robert Cialdini called Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. And I was reading it and I was just totally enthralled. It was all about how people make decisions and, how the best salespeople sell. And, it was just amazing. I'm going through it and I'm underlying and highlighting and writing margin notes and thinking about the clients that I was doing work for. And I'm like, oh, I could try that for this one and that for this one. And so I started to test some of these ideas, taking them from his book and his experience and applying them in marketing, and it started to work. And I was like, all right, that was the point of no return. I started to delve into, oh, there's that word again. I started to dive, I should say, into behavioral science. And I had the opportunity to work with a couple of behavioral scientists, cognitive scientists, and just really started to go deep into it. And then, flash forward, I had the opportunity to open my own agency, and had the opportunity to do it with a guy who had been working with me at another agency. And he said, look, we really got something here. Like people like this. We know that it works. They're coming to us for it. Let's give it a go. And so we did. And that was, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago. And here we are today. So that was kind of who I am in terms of behavioral science. And then I had the opportunity to write the book because during COVID, I was supposed to speak at South by Southwest. It obviously was canceled because of the pandemic. And Kogan Page out of London reached out to me and said, hey, we wanted to see your session. Clearly, we're not going to be able to because the conference is canceled. How about writing a book? Would you be interested? And I was like, oh, I never really thought about it, but heck yeah, why not? And so here we are today.
Wow, it's a perfect opportunity over COVID, right? That's to go dark and like write a book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's true. Our business got very, very quiet as it did for I think almost every agency. We'd been running full tilt, and then everyone pulled back. No one was sure what was going on, and so we're still doing some work for clients, but not nearly a lot or not nearly as much. And so it was the perfect time to write the book. And it was funny. The publisher had said to me, we're going to expect about a chapter a week. Not that we expect you to send a chapter a week, but basically the way the schedule is going to break out is, roughly it's going to come out to be a chapter a week. We're going to want the first batch and then the second batch. And so, and I said, well, is that typical for someone who has a full-time job and is also writing a book? And they assured me that it was. I can't imagine how I would have done it had it not been, during COVID. But I met their deadline. So I'm like, okay, you asked, I delivered.
Wow. So, what I learned from the book, and I love your direct mail examples that you give, and just how to really stand out and be unique. Have you noticed that, as marketing budgets are shifting now, and, before we had, like, I think larger budgets for more unique ideas. Are you seeing a shift on your side in terms of what people are willing to do, or is that kind of why they come to you to get these big, bold ideas, and is mail still kind of your go-to?
So I started in mail, and I love it. I suppose, you always love what you started with, but these days we probably do 60-70% digital, whether it's uh, emails or ads or landing pages or content, right? And then, the balance of that is direct mail. And many of our clients are looking for integrated campaigns. I would say that most of them come to us, they have an idea of what they want channel wise, but what they're looking for is the idea. They're looking for the application of behavioral science. So they'll come to us with a particular goal in mind. We need to um, convince people to buy more insurance. We need to convince people to subscribe to our newspaper. We need to sell more, business intelligence software, whatever it is, and they're like, how do we do it? We figure we can do email. We figure we can do direct mail, but what is our message and what's the best way to kind of trigger some of those hardwired decision making shortcuts that our customers and prospects rely on, because that's the kind of the essence of behavioral science. When you think about it, it's this study of how people behave, why they do what they do, and perhaps more important for our conversation, how we can get people to do more of what we want them to do. And behavioral scientists know that there are a lot of automatic, instinctive, reflexive behaviors that people have. And from a marketing perspective, it's a matter of figuring out the best way to trigger them, the best way to increase the likelihood that people will just automatically decide to open this email, decide to open this direct mail piece, decide to click on the button or pick up their phone and dial that 800 number. And, so that's primarily what they'll come to us for. They have a basic idea of where they want to be, who they're marketing to, what they're selling, the channels they want to be in. What they want is the strategy and the messaging. They want that infusion of the marketing best practices and the behavioral science.
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. And why when I read your book, I did similar to what you were saying. I was like, oh my God, like, every single chapter was so intense. I had so many ideas that I started putting together kind of similar concepts for our solar clients. I do a lot of solar work. And really, I mean, like just every single one of those strategies that can be applied, like the loss aversion and the scarcity and, the Zingarnik effect and, just autonomy bias, like, and then combining them. And now what we're starting to do is based off of different milestone in the CRM, trying different direct mail that are gonna be going out and triggering those, right? But I think what's really, really interesting and we're how we can apply it online is, not just, because it's almost like the time of day, and we talked about temporal landmarks and other like times when people might be more interested in a product. But I'm interested, are you using, any different type of logic to determine, okay, what's the data saying? Like they got this ad and they clicked and maybe they didn't do anything, but someone else did. And was there any other indicator of that behavior that's a commonality that we can use to try to create like workflows or other deeper levels of post-click engagement?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it seems to almost vary by client or by vertical, by industry. Um, for example, like if I'm working on a credit card client, the probably one of the biggest predictors of someone deciding they want a new credit card is, they've either had a really bad experience or they feel that their rate is too high. And if you can come along with a zero APR introductory offer, or if you can come along with it, so it's almost like you almost need to be in the mailbox on a regular basis or be in the inbox on a regular basis. And when that thing happens, same thing with auto insurance. One of the biggest predictors of someone deciding, I'm going to switch car insurance companies is their rates got increased or they were in an accident. And so as marketers, we're not necessarily going to have that information. We may not know when our competitors are going to raise their rates. Maybe we find out afterwards, but prior to that happening, we might not have that intelligence. We probably won't. So some of it is just kind of being in the right place at the right time, having a consistent brand presence, being, consistently around and creating the messaging that makes people have that top of mind awareness so that when that thing happens, that trigger happens, they're like, oh yeah, right. I want to go with that car insurance company, or, I want to choose that solar company. So I think it's more, it's less about having access to that, that thing that's going to make somebody say yes, and more about, just trying to be there. Now, that said, there are some products I think where, yes, you can start to trace that. It's like, all right, somebody saw our ad and they clicked on it, right? And then they came to the landing page, but then they didn't really do anything. So then maybe we retarget them and we get them to maybe download that tip sheet or that guide or that white paper. And then we're like, okay. And if there's been maybe 2 or 3 qualifying events, then we're like, all right, it looks like maybe, they're going to go a little bit deeper. And so maybe we should invest a little bit more money against them. I'm sorry, actually, you did ask about budgets earlier. And I think with everything else I was talking about, I didn't mention that. But, I think every marketer is trying to save money, particularly now. Particularly now, there's, with all the uncertainty going on, people are hitting pause on hiring. People are hitting pause on campaigns. They're kind of watching their budgets, but always people want to be efficient in their spend. And so what we'll often do with clients is say, well, let's talk about differential spending. Let's spend a little bit more against the most qualified prospects, the ones that look like they're going to have the potential to give us more back, and we'll invest a little bit less against the suspects, if you will. So it's not uncommon for us to do a campaign where we'll have 2 or 3 tiers, and one tier that looks the best is going to get the biggest investment. They'll maybe be hit in multiple channels multiple times. And then there's a mid tier and they'll have a little bit less. And then there's that, the bottom tier, and, we'll give them a try and see what happens. And if they happen to move up into the next tier, great, if we can get something from them, but we won't overinvest in them because the potential for return isn't as good.
I got a question for you. So, we talk about critical mass messaging and how we have to reach the same audience with a certain number of communications over a certain period of time to typically move them through the funnel. So, how many, when you're testing a certain strategy in behavioral science, how many times are we reaching them with that same message or like messages before we decide if it's working or not working? Is it like just one message, or we're like, no, we're going to try loss aversion, we're going to try it a couple times? And how much data are you looking at to say yes, or is there more to it? Like maybe it would work if there wasn't a tariff. Maybe it would have worked if there wasn't. Is there any situational things people should be thinking of to like layer on?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. And very often we'll do a campaign, and it'll maybe be an integrated campaign. So maybe people are going to get the loss aversion against the social proof, right? So loss aversion, people are twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. Social proof, when people are uncertain, they look at what other people are doing, particularly people like themselves. They follow their lead. So two, really good, solid behavioral science strategies, and depending on what you're selling, let's say, solar, for example, either of those would work. It's like, hey, you're losing money by not converting to solar, or hey, most of your neighbors are doing this, maybe you should look into it too. So both of those are really solid. And so maybe what we would do is we'd say, all right, we're going to do maybe some social ads, some email, and some direct mail, right? And we're going to create this integrated campaign for loss aversion and for social proof. Let's, deploy the campaign, and then let's take a look. And what we're going to do is we'll probably measure the loss aversion against the social proof, and then the two of those also against the previous best performing message, whatever that was. We'll call that the control, right? And we'll see, and if it looks like one of them is doing better, then a lot of times what we do is we'll then kind of back test. We'll say, all right, it looks like this one is the winner. It looks like loss aversion is going to be the winner. Now let's put it in the market a second time to confirm our suspicions here and see if we get the same results. Because you never know. Every once in a while, some weird thing happens and it throws off the numbers, and it's like, what the heck happened? This looked like it was a winner and now it's not. Or that looked like it was, dead in the water, but boy, it's just come roaring back. So a lot of times we'll do the A/B test, if you will, and then maybe throw it in the market a second time just to kind of back test it or verify it.
Makes sense. So now to kind of shift a little bit, we talked about how you're doing a lot of digital as well. Not sure if you've seen what I've seen, but we're now experiencing triple the fraud than we've ever had. Even in the last 3 weeks, we always I use a ClickC spot protection for most of my clients, and a couple months ago, let's say I would spend 5,000 in Google ads, I would block around 30%. So I would save them around 2,500 or maybe a little bit less in fake traffic. Just in the last few weeks, we've seen that no matter what people are spending, we're saving them equal to or more in bots. So if I spend 5, I'm blocking 5,000 or 6,000 in bots. And those are just of what we can see, not the sophisticated AI. So now as bots become more human and are mimicking behavior, how are we gonna, are you thinking ahead, or what are some of your ideas on how to, will they influence our marketing strategy, I guess, in terms of behavioral science? Because can we trust it?
Yeah, well, two different questions there. Will
Yeah.
will they influence our behavior, or our marketing strategy, I should say? Yeah. Can we trust it? Hmm. That remains to be seen. I mean, it's like every time we blink, something new is coming out, right? I mean, you were just talking about like how quickly things have changed. It's just it's amazing. It's almost like I hesitate to say anything because by tomorrow it could change. But my current thinking, and I am not an AI specialist. I am not. I am not. I am not. Right. So take what I'm going to say with a grain of salt. But my current thinking is yes, this huge growth in AI, the creation of bots and of agents that will kind of take over some of the human response. We can't avoid it. It is happening, and so we might as well incorporate it into our strategy, and we might as well do it in a very thoughtful way. And let's get into the game because otherwise, we're going to be left behind. So we have to recognize it. We have to figure out the best, most ethical way to use it. And I think, what it comes down to, I think for a lot of people is if you can make my life better as a customer or as a prospect, using this, go for it. But if it's going to make my life worse, if it's going to make me more frustrated, if I'm not going to get what I need, for the love of God, please find a better way, right? Again, it's incumbent upon us to figure out the best ways to use this at this stage of the game. You mentioned trust. Yeah, I'm a copywriter by trade, right? So I write the direct mail pieces and the emails and things like that. Right now, it's like a 50-50 split where, you can depend on AI. If you're going to have AI generate your copy for you, it's going to be better than half of what you would get, and it's going to be worse than the other half of what you would get. And that's just kind of by definition where it is right now. So, would I trust it to write my copy? Absolutely not. Are there other things that I would, trust it to do? Sure. I might feed it some of my copy and say, did I miss an angle here? How could I break this up into three smaller, atomized bits of information? What reading level am I at? Things like that. Or, hey, these are the different points I'm going to cover in this article. Did I miss one? Is there another way to look at this? But I wouldn't farm out my copy. I just wouldn't do it. But there are, but I would trust it to do other things. But it's also a trust and verify thing. The stories of AI hallucinating and just making stuff up and making up citations that don't,
Bias, the creator bias is a big one. Right.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And I will say this too, that some of our clients will put in the contract that they do not want us to use AI, and it's like, fair enough, and we will absolutely respect that. We get it, we understand it. We work with a lot of highly regulated industries, and we totally understand that. But so should we as marketers be thinking about it, thinking about how to incorporate it into our strategies? I think yes. Do I completely 100% trust it right now? I think no.
And do you think that, because of, I guess, human behavior and now, how it's changing so rapidly by using more AI, and will there be other behavioral science strategies that we don't even know about yet that are going to be, are we changing as humans because of technology?
Yeah, it's so funny you should ask that because I was talking to somebody else recently who asked a kind of a similar question, like with all of this reliance on AI and everything just being automated and faster and is it going to change people? And I mean, yeah, there's a certain amount of brain plasticity. We do change. We know, there's studies that show just I don't know, having a cell phone on the table when you're having dinner or having the cell phone, next to you when you're trying to work influences, how productive you can be, how much you concentrate. So we know that things are changing, but we also know that the human brain, for the most part, has remained very, very similar for all of these generations. I mean, which is why some of these behavioral science principles still hold. At a very basic deep-seated level, we're still loss averse. At a very basic deep-seated level, we still rely on social proof. So will technology change us? Of course. I think that it has in the past and it will continue to. But how humans respond and the reliance on decision making shortcuts and the tendency that we have to not always be fully present because we just don't have the time to be, I think that is consistent and that's not going to change.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the way that we're looking at it, or at least I am with my clients, my agency, is that knowing these strategies, and I think you brought up a really important point about ethics, right? Like how to use them for good, and how to, really, this is a learning opportunity to quickly identify what the customer really truly wants. What cues are they giving us, when they even chat with a bot or they chat with a human or they're calling on the phone, that we can immediately recognize, and put up a different script on for someone on the call center. Like, this is how they're responding. Don't think for yourself on, get overwhelmed, or try try this script, right? And we've been doing some of that already, and I think it's, just really, really exciting and helpful. And then being able to determine after the call, using AI to review conversations with humans and, or scripts, but more humans, and to say, okay, well, did it work out the way we expected it to? What was our alpha and delta, and how do we expect it is going to work out based off what we know about human science and behavioral science and marketing? And if it didn't didn't resonate, then why? Why was that? And what can we do to be better communicators?
I think that's a great way to approach it. I mean, you're testing it, and then you're kind of taking a look and saying, all right, well, how did it work? And if it worked, great, terrific. And if it didn't, let's try to figure out why. And let's pivot. Let's see. And what we might find, like with messaging, is certain things work well against one segment and not against the other. And we might need to get to that sophisticated point where we can start to tell, all right, this is a person who's way more risk averse. This message is going to play better for them. This is a person who's way more, promotion focused. This message is going to play better for them. It's funny, like even when you have a human customer service person, just the way you frame messages can make a difference. There's been a lot of research that shows if you use more concrete language, it increases people's sense of satisfaction with a customer service rep, and it also can increase their buying behavior, which is interesting. And I can remember years ago, just talking to people who I was working with. Doing customer service where people would call up to cancel a service. And so they would say, oh, well, would you stay if we, and it was for a phone company. So would you stay if we gave you, 60 minutes of free calling? And, people were like, no, no, no. How about an hour? Oh, well, okay. And it's the same thing, right? 60 minutes of free calling is the same thing as an hour of free calling. But, it's and if you were just scripting this out, you might be like, well, what difference does it make? You know what I mean? But when you're actually talking to people, you realize that, that it's that mental shortcut. It's like minutes sounds, well, it doesn't sound like a lot, but a full hour, well, that, and
Right.
again, people are cruising along on autopilot. They're not really thinking, so it's being able to discover these things, which we did years ago with people, but you can certainly do that using a bot too. But you want to start to test these different things to see, these kind of idiosyncrasies that humans have, or these decision-making shortcuts that, we're relying on, the factors that influence our decisions that we're not even aware of. I mean, if you said to somebody, if you pointed out to them and said, well, Anna, that 60 minutes is 1 hour. You'd be like, of course I do. Do you think I'm an idiot? Yes, of course I do, like, yeah. But, in the moment, it's like, no, I don't want 60 minutes. How about, oh yeah, I'll take an hour. So it's crazy.
Yeah, I think even, using it internally for teams, like I thought it was really interesting about like what I learned about the magnetic middle, and just, how if you have too many products. I mean, in my book, of course, I talk about the same one that you have in yours, that, the jam study of like the, 6 was better than 24. But we've
Yep.
really found since then is 3 is the magic number. But I thought it was interesting about how if you, oh, I don't didn't always think about the different pricing, right? So if you had another something higher, really, it's gonna, if you add even one product, it could change everything, right? Because of the pricing structure. Like that you should almost have something that's overpriced so that they can go to the thing that you want them to buy.
Yeah, yeah. Behavioral scientists have a term for it. They call it decoy pricing. So if you have like your basic and your deluxe, okay, some people are going to buy the basic, some people are going to buy the deluxe. Probably more people are going to buy the basic than you want. That's how it goes because there's the basic and the deluxe. But when you introduce a super deluxe, so now that you have a basic, a deluxe, and a super deluxe, some people might buy the super deluxe, but a lot more people are going to go for that deluxe. It's in the middle range. It feels like a good place to be. So it literally pushes people there. And some marketers are getting very sophisticated. And what they'll do, and you can almost see this if you walk into a movie theater and go to buy popcorn, but the small popcorn, let's say, is $1, and the medium is $2, twice the cost, right? And then the large is 250.
Right.
And so you're like, it's only 50 cents more. I'm going for the large, you know. So they're using the middle option to as the decoy to push it to the large, you know. So sometimes you use the topmost one to push you down to the middle. Sometimes you use the middle to push you up to the high end. It's really interesting. I was in Mexico on vacation in February, and I pulled out I went to this restaurant, started to look at the drink menu, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're doing it. They're doing it right here. You know, they had like a small they had like a small goblet, a medium-sized goblet, and then this giant goblet. But the giant goblet was only like, I don't know, 50 pence or something more than the medium. And I was watching, and the waiters are just coming by with these giant like people are buying them, you know? And I'm like, I love this. Even on vacation, I'm, seeing behavioral science.
It's amazing. It's hard to turn off, isn't it? So what was is there an example of a strategy or a campaign you put together that you thought, everything's pointing to that this is going to work out, but then it didn't, and it
Uh,
was yeah.
so, well, okay, I can, there's, I can give you two, and one of them I can tell you why it didn't work, and the other one I still don't know. So on one of them, um, it was the first credit card piece of business that I was working on, and so we decided to really lean heavily into um, the von Restorff effect or the isolation effect, the idea that things that stand out from their surroundings are the things that get noticed and remembered. And so, we're looking at all the different credit card solicitations and are like, they all look alike. So we thought, well, we're going to do something that just looks completely different. It's, it's going to be impossible to resist. It's going to stand out in the mail. You're going to be so curious you have to open it, and we were like, gung ho, this is what we're going to do. And we probably walk into the client meeting, and I will say this was years ago, but probably walk into the client meeting, we present the work, and they're like, no, like, no, no, no. There are certain things that you just have to have. If you're selling a credit card, you have to say whether or not there's a fee. You have to have what the APR is. You have to have the go-to rate. That go-to rate is the big driver, of information like this. And what? No, no, no. Everything looks, and they're like, it all looks the same for that, but so like we appreciate what you're trying to do. You want something that's going to stand out, but you've gone too far. So they sent us back to the drawing board. So I know, we didn't even get that into the market, but I know why now. And we ended up having a long relationship with them. I think, established 7 different controls for 7 different segments. So it was a very good working relationship, a good productive relationship. But it started out a little rocky because we leaned a little too far into that idea of, we just want to be different. And we had a reason for why we wanted to do it, but we were ignoring too much about the category. And then there was another piece I did. Anna, it still keeps me up at night. Um, we looked at what the client had. That they hired us. They said, listen, we really want you to work with us. Here's where we are, but we really think you could up our game. And we dug into their business, and we created this mailing piece for them. And they were like, "Oh my God, we love this!" Like, they were so excited, and we were so excited. And it didn't show the lift. It just kind of hummed along, and it did just as well, or just as unwell as their existing stuff did. It just didn't. It didn't do it, and they couldn't figure it out. We couldn't figure it out. And
Did the mail get delivered?
I know, yeah, I know, really. It's like,
I've had those situations where I'm like, this is not. There's something that's not like the spidey senses go up, and I'm like, I don't know, like because the post office is right, they won't scan, especially if it's every door direct mail, or sometimes they scan it at the route, but they won't like you don't. I mean, what if that bag like fell off of the little guy's cart and rolled under? I mean, who knows? But
you never know. I mean, every once in a while you do hear these stories where like this, like, these bags of mail are discovered somewhere, and they're
I
like, oh
know.
my gosh, so who knows? And maybe I'll sleep tonight now that you've planted that idea in my head. I'll sleep better
Go
tonight.
down a valley
Might have been
somewhere,
something like that.
Right.
But yeah, no, and it's fun, and the client that I was working with, he was scratching his head too. We could not figure it out, and then he ultimately moved on to another job, and that was like, or another company, I should say. And so that was the end of that. We never did get to the bottom of it. So sometimes, sometimes it happens. But that's the thing in marketing, particularly in applying behavioral science to marketing, we test, and it's notoriously difficult to beat a control. I mean, it really is. Controls are controls for a reason. They're a control because they are the thing that works the best, you know, over time. You know, iteration after iteration after iteration, campaign after campaign after campaign, that, they're the things that are unbeatable until they get beaten. But obviously they're not easy to beat. And so,
And then how much data
it
does it have
happens.
data? I think that's also I get that question asked all the time. Well, we're gonna we're gonna AB, but really AB, there's so many, unless you're running at the same time, and truly it's really hard. I find it to be very challenging to feel feel empowered about an AB test because there's so many other factors that could be involved,
So,
right?
well, I think you do have to control it. You have to, you have to have equal sets in the audience, and it has to be really random, and it has to be mailed at the same time. I mean, you do have to control so that you have a single variable, and if you can trust that that is going to happen, then I think you can get a pretty good indication. But if the targeting is off, or if the deployment of the campaign is off, or if there's something that kind of puts the finger on the scale one way or another, then yeah, you're not going to get reliable data. But
Yeah, and then I also think it also could be like a seasonal thing, like, okay, we did it in January and it was great. But now maybe it's because we're coming off of New Year's and there's temporal landmarks and people were thinking a certain way and it resonated at that time. And but if we ran that same mailer in October, maybe it wouldn't.
yeah, well, that's funny. It brings up a good point. I often say to my clients, I'm like, listen, what worked in the past may not work in the future, right? What didn't work before may work now. What works for somebody else may not work for you. So you really, we need to kind of go in with our eyes open, and
Mm.
don't dismiss an idea just because you're like, oh, well, no one else is doing it, or, oh, we tried it once before years ago and it didn't work. To your point, things change, and it might be that now is the time.
Yeah.
Or also things fatigue, something that's been working really, 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 really well for a long time, maybe will start to not work as well. People are used to seeing it, or, the message is getting old, or, any number of, people change, and it's time to try something new.
Absolutely. Or I mean, it makes me think it's a little off topic, but when we thinking about mailing lists, my father, he passed away 11 years ago, and my mom still gets mail with his name on it.
Mm.
And it's just like I can't even understand, like, these people have no verifications and whatnot. But this makes me think often about the quality of some of these lists we put.
Of a list,
You
yeah.
know,
Yeah, no, you're right. You're
yeah,
absolutely right. Yeah, it happens in direct mail, also with email that, you're sure that these people have opted in, but you wonder, or did they opt in, but in such an obscure way that they didn't realize they were, or, at least if you're doing a split test, in theory, the audience should be the same, with the same, warts and all, in both, both test cells.
right. Well, so what's next for? I know you do a lot of keynote speaking, and what's next for you? Are you going to write another book, or what are you what's happening in Nancy's world?
Yeah, well, this way, so Kogan Page, the publishing company, has been asking for a while now. What do you think? What do you think? And I just keep thinking back to that chapter a week and how grueling that was. And I'm like, gee, I don't know. And I mean, honestly, I co-run HBT Marketing, the marketing agency, and so my number one goal is to service my clients. That's my day job. That's what I love doing. I love taking on the challenges, and trying to create new controls and solve marketing problems, and all. So that's the day job. I do a lot of speaking because I love that. It allows me to give back to the community, but also to continue to learn from the community. I mean, it's like the best thing in the world to get invited to speak at a conference, because then you get to listen to every other speaker, which is fabulous. Um, so that's so I'm doing the speaking, I'm working with the clients, and I'm making notes for something that might possibly be another book, but maybe not. But it's every once in a while I'll get an idea and I'll tuck it in a file someplace, and we'll see. We'll see. But for now, I'm doing the speaking circuit, which I'm loving, and talking about my book, which I'm loving, and working with clients, which I'm loving.
Awesome. So I guess my last question for you is, do you have any tips or any common mistakes you think that businesses make when trying to leverage behavioral science and marketing, and how they could maybe avoid them?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a few of them, honestly, but one of them is, particularly in B2B, people are like, yeah, now I understand what you're saying. I understand that a lot of decisions are emotional. I understand that they're instinctive and hardwired, but not for me, not for my customers. My customers are really intelligent, highly educated, in control of really large budgets. And so this doesn't apply to them. And the truth of the matter is, people are people, whether they're at home or at work. And, we all are subject to these decision making shortcuts. And again, I'm not saying that people never put on their thinking caps. I'm not saying that we never weigh the pros and cons, but very often we are making decisions instinctively. And when you think about making a sale, particularly in B2B, but also in B2C, there are a number of steps that have to happen before you can get to the ultimate ask, the ultimate request to buy, right? I mean, you got to get someone to open the email or open the direct mail piece or pay attention to the ad. And then you've got you got to get them to request some information or talk to the salesperson. There are a lot of little yeses you have to get before you can get to the big yes. And so many of those little yeses are happening more on autopilot. We're just kind of cruising along on autopilot and reacting. So one mistake is people said, no, it's not for my audience. And I would say to you, we all rely on decision making shortcuts. Behavioral science affects us all. So don't turn it away. I think another mistake is people will say, well, all right, let me give it a try. And they try it once and they don't get, this astronomically high response rate. And so they're like, all right, I tried it. It doesn't work. And again, it's hard to be to control. It's also possible that you didn't apply it properly. Sometimes we have the law of unintended consequences. We think we're using the behavioral science tactic the right way, but actually we're misusing it. And actually that leads me to probably my third reason. The third thing that, people kind of go, "Oh, it's not for me." You take something like social proof and they're like, well, all right, I get how social proof works. That's a real easy one. I tell people that a lot of people are doing something and they're going to want to follow the crowd. Perfect, right? But then, they sit down and they start to type out this email and they say, too many people wait to buy insurance until they're older. And what does that say? It basically says, if you've been waiting, you're in great company. Lots of people just like you just keep on waiting. It's like the backfire effect.
Right.
And, so it's either people dismiss it or they try it once and they're like, I'm one and done, or they try it and they think, no, this doesn't work because they've misapplied it. So I would encourage people to dabble, to test, to engage an agency or a company that has experience doing this. If they really want to try it out and they're not completely confident that they're doing it right because they've never done it before. So how could they be confident they're doing it right? But it's so powerful. And many of my clients, and you asked me about my failures. You didn't ask me about the successes. The successes our agency has had, but many of our clients see double and triple digit lifts over response, and I'm sorry, over benchmarks and controls. Double and triple digit lifts in response over benchmarks and controls. You may remember from the book, we worked with one client where we used reciprocity principle. They had a group of financial advisors who were no longer selling their no longer selling their work. They had their products. They had stopped over a year ago selling these particular financial products, and nothing my client did, no phone call, no email, no letter was making a difference. We used the reciprocity principle. We sent them a gift. They weren't expecting it. We sent them a really cool gift. Next thing you know, the client calls us and says, 68 million in incremental revenue off of this one campaign. It was an email and a direct mail piece. So there are some definite successes.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, that's one of my favorite parts about reading your book. I just loved all your personal stories, in the book, and all the case studies and, examples that you had of, the direct mail was with the doctor, or the God, the one I never gonna have a senior moment where it looked like a skeleton, or was it, oh man, like having a it was like for like a medical, it's like a medical thing, or someone had to, they like the hazmat, it was like a hazmat kind of concept. You're not following, remembering me? Oh man.
Yeah. Now I'm having the senior moment.
Oh
I don't
man.
know.
And it was like, it was so surprising. It was like they got like bones or something.
Oh, the Sci-Fi Channel
I
piece.
can't say
Yes,
it. Oh yeah,
yes,
something like that was.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we were trying to convince media buyers to take out advertising on the Sci-Fi Channel when people thought like the Sci-Fi Channel was, the Attack of the 20-Foot Woman or something like. They were like, "Oh, that's going to be Star Trek Rewind." Like there's no way my clients are going to want to advertise on it. And so we created that really engaging, surprising piece that just got them involved and just opened their eyes to the kinds of programming that the Sci-Fi Channel was carrying that they had no idea, and it just kind of pulled people in, and yeah, it actually worked very well for them. It won, I think it won the London International Advertising Award category, which was kind of a nice feather in our cap at the
Like
time.
skeleton. What was it you sent them? And there was like a
Um,
mystery, and
it was we sent them a microscope and a series of slides, and when they would put the slide under the microscope, they would be looking at something that was representative of the kind of programming that they would find on the Sci-Fi Channel. So there was something about, I don't know, discovering, I don't know, water on Mars was one thing. I forget what, what they all were, but it was just, it wasn't Star Trek reruns, which is exactly what people were, what these media planners were expecting, because they had this idea in their head of what this would be and they'd already dismissed it. So we had to kind of break through and get them to even consider it with a really cool package. And then once they started to interact with the package, it helped reframe, what they thought of when they thought of the Sci-Fi Channel. So yeah, thank you for remembering that. We together we got there.
Barely.
Almost barely.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really good. I will say that everyone should pick up a copy of Nancy's book. It's on Amazon. We'll have links. And I just want to thank you so much for being here today. It's been,
Thank you so much. It's been a complete pleasure. I've completely enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
and to all my listeners, please join me next week as I interview another industry expert to help you succeed on and offline. Be sure to like us on the Covert Code and all of our social channels, and we'll see you in the pixels. Aloha.